how is personalization and AI is going to impact food? And most importantly, entrepreneurs and corporations, how can you leverage and capitalize on the changing movements of the industry? So before that, I want to tell you a little story about my family's WhatsApp group. So every Thursday, ahead of our Friday Shabbat dinner, it's a Jewish tradition to have a Shabbat dinner with all of your family every week, my mom is asking us a question. What kind of diet are you on this week? And then we all go on and on about what we're eating and what we're not eating that particular week. She gets all confused and frustrated, and then eventually she's telling us what is her plans, what is she going to make and cook, and asks us if she's going to facilitate and actually address all of their needs and restrictions we all have. So little did my mom know that this whole weekly discussion on WhatsApp is going to lead me to investigate the changes in food consumption, and actually to set up my startup called Tastewise, which is doing food trends analysis and helping food companies to better understand consumers and try to predict the future of food. So with that, the changing food environment is not only my mom's issue, it's also a broader discussion. And with me are a group of experts. Thank you all for coming. Can you please introduce yourselves and maybe say a few words about yourselves and what is your preferred comfort food? Go ahead, Katy.
Hello, my name's Katy Askew, and I'm the senior editor at Food Navigator, which is a trade publication for the food industry, focusing on innovation and future trends. My favorite comfort food, well, my husband is a fantastic cook, and he's American, so his favorite food to cook is Mexican, obviously. But in actual fact, when I really think about my favorite comfort food, it's very boring. It's just mashed potatoes and gravy, so.
That's exciting. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eyal Jagermann. I'm from Tel Aviv. I co-founded and was the head chef of the Barbary, which won London's Best Restaurant in 2017. And my ultimate comfort food is my mom's schnitzels and roasted sweet potatoes.
There you go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Sweet. I work for the World Economic Forum. I have a big, complicated title up there, but why I'm relevant to this space is that I work on a project around delivering the future of protein in a safe, affordable, sustainable manner to a growing population. And instead of answering what my favorite food is, I will talk about, since I've been working on this project on the future of protein, and that's only been 6 months, I've eaten more beef in that period than the entire combined rest of my life cumulatively. So I feel like when you're talking about disruption, it's important to understand the nuances of what you're talking about.
My name's Jamie. I'm one of the founders of SORTEDfood. We started 10 years ago as a group of friends trying to teach ourselves how to cook and share those recipes and tips and tricks and fun with a few more people. It's now grown to be one of the largest food conversations online, the most engaged cooking channel on YouTube globally. There's about 30,000 hours of our content watched every day. And my favorite comfort food, well, as soon as you say comfort food, my head goes to mac and cheese.
Oh.
With some jalapenos to spice it up, and maybe some garlic breadcrumbs on top for a bit of crunch.
Are you also American? So let's talk about what is changing with the food culture, right? So Lisa, we're seeing kind of contradicting trends. From one hand, we're seeing 500% rise in veganism in less than 4 years. But then on the other hand, we're seeing so many people going after the paleo diet, purely basing their diets on meat and fish. So is the change really towards more responsibility, or what are people thinking?
Yeah, I think it depends, and it varies. And I think that's the critical thing about the food system, is that it's so personal and so local. And when you take these mass generosities, they really cover the underarching story of what's going on. But maybe I would pose the question to the audience and just ask, how many of you guys eat meat? And how many of you would prefer to have locally sourced meat? Okay, so if I were to tell you that a huge portion of what is locally sourced is actually fed on and built on feedstock that's imported from Brazil, would that change your opinion on if it's being locally sourced? Would that change how you think about it? And I'm getting some nods in the audience. And what I'm trying to draw in my bigger point here is that the food system is so complex and there's so many facets to it. And when you see these trends and these local kind of big projections of I'm going to become a vegetarian or I'm going to go meatless on Mondays, whatever they happen to be, oftentimes you're seeing that the consumer is very disconnected from the bigger picture of food. And I think that's really important. And I think as you see a lot of customers starting to ask more and more questions about what their food is and where it comes from, the technology will play out in this brilliant way to start to connect the path for consumers.
Yeah, there's a whole discussion around organic food, right? Like we're so delighted when we see something that's organic and affordable, but it's not so environmentally friendly, right?
Well, it depends, again, it depends on how you define environmentally friendly. It certainly takes out the chemicals and pesticides, but those chemicals and pesticides were put there for a reason. And what it doesn't do, it doesn't allow you to grow huge volumes of food on a small footprint. So again, there are these trade-offs to be made, and I think when you look at the consumer, what you really want to understand is what's driving those preferences, what's driving those changes, and where can those great impacts be?
I think in terms of the environmental footprint of organic farming, looking to the future, you're seeing a big increase in regenerative farming, and that's becoming something that's more on the mainstream agenda. And the idea there is that agriculture can actually take carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it into the soil and build soil health and healthy soils. So that's something that's increasingly on the agenda.
So Katy, there's a lot of fake news when it comes to the political world. Does it happen in the food world as well? You're the editor of Food Navigator. What is the media's responsibility portraying these trends? And research is coming from all different angles, and it really depends on who's sponsoring the research and the results.
I think there is a concern with the messaging that people are getting on health and what's healthy and what isn't, and what diets are beneficial and what aren't. A lot of what you hear from blogs say aren't necessarily scientifically supported. And this sort of all these different messages that are bombarding people really just serve to build confusion and mistrust. So the food industry itself is left with an issue of how do you build consumer trust and show consumers sort of what the right ways of eating are. And that issue is compounded by the fact that a lot of times people don't like the idea of science and food mixing. So this disconnect between science and scientific evidence-based information and what people want to listen to is another issue that the food industry has to figure out how to bridge, I think.
So how do you wrap the messaging in a way that the consumer will understand whether or not organic is good or locally sourced meat is good and so on? How can we portray, because most people here said they would prefer locally sourced meat, but they don't really know how is the cow being fed and what is the footprint they're living.
It comes back to the traceability technology that was referred to already. I mean, you've got things like blockchain coming up. People with digitalization can, use apps to see where their food comes from, how it was produced, what's inside it, and it gives a lot more information. I think just opening up that information and allowing people to see it is the only way forward. It's what people are increasingly expecting.
And if I can just jump in, there's an interesting statistic in a report that just came out at the end of last month. Vermont was one of the first states in the US to pass a law around requiring GMO labeling. And what the study just found was that actually consumer resistance to GMO or opposition to GMO dropped by 20% once the labeling went into effect. So you see that these traceability, these transparency tools that can be put in place by some of the technology or some of the labeling and transparency that are out there actually change the conversation with the consumer.
Yeah. So, Jamie, you're the person that connects to, food and social media. I recently came across these stats that 69% of millennials are taking a picture of the food before they eat it, right? And they're posting it. And you've been, in the industry for a decade. You have the biggest YouTube channel and with the foodie community. What has changed in the past few years? Like, what is the consumer's perspective when it comes to food? Has anything changed?
I think culturally, people are now making food part of their identity. So where you have people saying they're going to go vegan, that's not just the food that they're eating, but it's the lifestyle that they're trying to take part in as well. And I think Katie's right. The amount of information that is out there about these newer, more niche diets, I think it's much easier than ever before to become more niche in terms of the diet that you're looking to take part in and the lifestyle that you're trying to lead, because there's so much information out there. And we've been seeing more and more comments from people who are looking to try new diets, have read a lot of information from blogs or from friends and family about the pros and cons of trying new things, and are looking for experts to tell them what's right and what's wrong and what's true and what's false. And we're not in a position to be able to do that. And I think that struggle of trying to find the trusted sources for information, and as you say, knowing where that information is coming from and who's paid for that information to be produced is really important. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing more and more people take such more interest in the food that they're eating, where it's coming from, maybe not down to the extent of how it's necessarily being produced, but where it's come from around the world in terms of new flavors and new dishes, and people want to try new things. They want to be that person that leads their group of friends, that knows the best new place to go to get fried chicken in London or whatever it is. And so people are starting to take much more care around those sides of things.
But then you get examples like The Shed, right? Like are you familiar with The Shed? It was voted London best restaurant on TripAdvisor, and it was all like fake. So Eyal, you're a chef. You worked so hard, to get up the rank on the social networks and the review sites. What did it make you feel?
Just before that, I want to comment about something Jamie said. It's really interesting. In the last few years, we feel it in the industry very much, that that sort of trend of really taking food and making it part of your personality and categorizing yourself in that vast world of, well, I don't eat that and I do eat that, and looking for what you say, like trendsetters. As chefs, people sort of take that direction, and he's the best new vegan chef, and she's doing now amazing stuff only with meat, and everyone caters for their diet. So it's very challenging. It's very interesting for us to sort of come up with menus and menu items that will cater for all of them.
So you won the best restaurant in London for 2017.
Yeah.
And you're a chief chef. How did you make it?
In the end, you cook from your heart, and you, at the Barbary, we had a framework that we try to tell a story of heritage, of culture. It just so happens that our culture has a lot of vegan and vegetarian options, so that worked really, really well. But yes, there were a few key moments in which I decided not to put butter in that dish, although I really, really wanted, because I knew that if I did, I'm restricting a lot of vegan people in having it. So I used olive oil instead. A lot of these examples we find today more than we did, I would say, 5 or even 10 years ago.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned sort of heritage and culture, because I think one of the big trends we're seeing in food is people are really seeking out authenticity and a food story. That's become so important for how consumers interact with food.
It is, and it relates to what you were just about to say. I feel that, and it's something that I'm really thinking about in the last few days with the new project that I'm working on. Food cannot be eaten outside of its context. And a dish can be, I can make a certain dish in one restaurant with a lot of background and a lot of truth and a lot of, everything connects in terms of how everything is designed, and it's really true and real, and it'll work fantastically because it's in the right context. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you take it out, it can be the exact same dish, and we won't feel the same about it. We won't get it in the same way. And it's really something that I'm thinking about a lot these days, yeah.
So that's exactly what happened with the shed,
Yes.
right? Because the entire setup was the main thing, but the food was out of boxes. So, I have a question. How many of you here work for a corporation in the corporate world? How many of you expense sometimes business lunch? All right, quite a few. It's a good amount. Have you heard of the recent WeWork Act, when they decided actually to ban all meat? So not only from their menus, but even if their employees will go on a business lunch with a client, they will not expense the meal if it had any meat in it. So I was really wondering, is that, we are talking a lot about corporate responsibility, is that like taking it a little bit too further in terms of like deciding what would your employees, eat during their lunchtime?
I mean,
Jamie,
it feels to me like food is a very personal choice, and I can't imagine a situation where an employer has the right to tell you whether you're allowed to eat certain things or not. And for me, it feels like an overstep. That really feels like that's a step too far. I think having guidelines and having advice is one thing, but yeah, banning employees from eating meat seems a step too far to me.
Yeah, but Lisa, governments do tell us, what we can eat, should eat. Sometimes, you just discussed the labeling regulation. So why can't corporations?
I'm conflicted on the WeWork proclamation, because I think I agree with you. Food is personal. You do have that choice. At the same time, we are facing tremendous planetary boundaries and tremendous constraints that unless we take these game-changing steps, we're not going to make the progress. So I think maybe to kind of flip it around on its head, I think the areas for governments, for corporations to really invest in is in creating alternatives that can provide the comfort, the feeling, the experience, the needs, and sometimes those are mental needs as well, that individuals seek and are trying to obtain, but through a variety of different ways. And for me, one of the really fantastic new technologies that's out there is the lab-grown meat, because that's done this really fantastic, game-changing technology breakthrough that it's completely removed the traditional production system. There is no cow involved after you extract the initial cells to kind of start the growth from. That's game-changing to me. That's not a just small, let's change the flavor of something so maybe it appeals to this user group. That is truly disruptive.
But it is going to take a long time, right? Like now,
Absolutely.
A pound costs thousands of dollars to produce.
Actually, Most Meat have just announced that they are going to be selling lab-grown meat on a commercial scale within 3 years. So it's not that far away. It's not sort of distant tech. It's within, I think, the next 5 years on from that, they expect to have brought the price down so that it can be sold in the supermarket. In 3 years from now, they think they'll be able to create lab-grown burgers for €9 a burger. So they're bringing the price
So
down
it's coming
rapidly.
faster than we expected, right?
And there's a massive influx of investment in that sector as well, from VCs, but also from corporations. Bell, Switzerland's largest meat processor, they're one of the investors in Most Meat now. So it's got a lot of industry backing, and it's changing rapidly.
Yeah.
And
Eyal,
the newest investor actually in Most Meat is the pharmaceutical company Merck. So obviously there's a lot of synergies between the health sector and the food sector, which makes it a really interesting, unique match. The regulation for each of those sectors also moves in very different ways. And kind of back to your original question about the role of the governments, the role of the companies, they need to start working more closely and bringing the consumers into these conversations as well, because even if you get the governments and the companies to agree and accelerate this new form of protein delivery, if you don't bring the consumers along, it's going to be a useless technology at the end of the day.
Well,
Eyal,
one of the interesting questions as well is obviously you need the cell culture to begin with. So then would it appeal to people who are meat reducers or vegetarians or vegans, because you still have to have the animal to start with. So the consumer perception of lab-grown meat and how you communicate it and how you bring the consumer along with you will be really key.
Exactly.
Eyal, will you cook such meat and serve it to your clients on your new concept?
It's an interesting question. I'm going to answer it carefully. And in the right context, yes. If that's where the world is going to, if that's what the consumer wants, if that's the demand, yes, I think, like in any business, you need to adapt to your customers' needs. And if that's where it's going, then a good chef will figure out a way to work with that and to make it amazing and delicious and just go with that. So yes.
So you mentioned, you already have a lot of vegetarian and vegan options. Is that because the consumers want it, or because this is part of your responsibility and care for the environment and animals?
Specifically at the Barbary, like I mentioned, it just worked out really well because modern Israeli cuisine has a lot of, it's very based on fruit and vegetables and grains and less heavy on heavy proteins like beef or lamb, although we did obviously have those options on the menu. So it worked really well. And we found a really good balance on the menu between protein dish and vegan and vegetarian. But obviously, no matter where you go now, whether it's a chain of hotels, a restaurant, or a takeaway option, vegetarian and vegan options are a must these days. That's just the demand.
Yeah. I've been talking to a few executives who work in the meat industry in the US, and they say, we keep talking about veganism rising, and 500% in less than 4 years is like a staggering number, but we still see, our sales numbers grow. So we're selling more meat than ever before. So, Jamie, I have a question, taking it a little bit to the branding experiences. Has people's relationship with food brands changed recently? You are working with a few food brands, right?
Yeah,
full disclosure.
I think people's relationships with brands overall has completely changed, and I think people are seeing it much more as an us and them style conversation, and coming back to that mistrust of information and what is out there and who's putting that information out there and what people should believe. It comes a lot to that, and we've kind of found ourselves as Sorted Food in this new space, which we kind of branded as kind of an allegory brand, where our job is purely just to tell stories. And those stories mainly come from great, passionate people doing incredible things around food who have fantastic stories to tell. And there are now food brands and other brands as well that are starting to believe in that kind of way of working more. They know that they can't just create an advert that tells people we do great stuff, because no one's going to believe them. So that you now have this more trusted source of people who are there that can actually dissect some of that information and put it out. But yeah, that relationship has definitely changed. And that's because of a lot of different things over the last few years.
Mm-hmm. And I just saw another stat that in America today, consumers spend more money on food in restaurants than on food in the retail and groceries department. And I know, so it's good news for you, Eyal, and for the restaurant industry, but they come with a lot more expectations, right? Because they come for not just the food and the taste.
Yeah.
So how do you get ready for this era?
There's definitely a growing interest in food and restaurants and chefs, and we all feel it all over the world, especially in cities like London, where I've been living here for 4 years, and I can feel even today is much, the scene and everyone dealing with it, and the amount of press that it's getting in festivals, and not to mention the craziness with social media and Instagram and all of these things is much bigger. How do you deal with it? I believe you do what you cook from the heart, like I say, and you make sure that you're aware of the changing environment. And what I mean by that is I'm going back a little bit to what I sort of said a bit earlier, that you must understand that food product today is the actual food, the actual thing that you're cooking, the actual product that you're making is at best 50% of the entire sort of product that the customer is getting. And that is all about, it starts with the website and the feel that you get from the website, the social media page. Obviously, we all, when we hear about a new restaurant, what's the first thing we do? We go and we see either the hashtag or the location, and we start looking at, okay, what's going on there? And as a restaurateur, you really need to be aware of that, and you need to make sure that you're clever with how you're fitting the food into all the other aspects of your business. Whether it's high-end restaurant or a takeout place, it's still the food, the actual product is a part of a few different things that you can control it if you know what you're doing.
So a restaurant today is more like a show. So you're running like a Vegas
it's not a show. There's a lot of truth. There's a lot of truth behind it, but you need to be aware of a lot of different elements today. Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. All right. I want us to move into talking a little bit about food and personalization. So personalization, has entered most of the industries, and it took it a little bit, longer to get into the food industry, but it's slowly happening. But before we start, hearing from the panel about their thoughts about personalization in food and maybe the opportunities there, can you please raise your hand if you absolutely love eating cilantro? All right. Can you raise your hand if you feel like cilantro tastes like soap? All right. So you don't have a problem. It's actually genetic, right? So 10% of the world's population actually, when they eat cilantro, they feel like soap. So there's a lot of opportunity to personalize food, not only in the way that we deliver food. There's a whole trend of meal kits coming and getting you the food you want, and Alexa maybe ordering food for you but also about taste buds, and we all act differently in health. So I was wondering, maybe Katy, what is your perspectives on food and how is it going to be personalized in the future?
Well, currently, I think the food sector as a whole is at a level where it's personalizing in terms of segmentation. So it'll take a consumer group and say, this food will be good for the elderly, or this food will be good for sports enthusiasts. I think further down the line, personalization is going to become a lot more sophisticated because of AI. I think there's a lot of work going on. Matthew Lang at the University of California, he's sort of leading a project to build what's described as the Internet of Food, sort of the HTML of food, a common language where you can digitalize every aspect of food from, the simpler physical characteristics all the way through to taste and perception. And that is extremely complicated because it also takes in things like the experience of eating as well, the context in which you're eating, which, as you said, is vital to how you perceive food. So as that happens, you then open up the opportunity to look at genetics and personalized food in terms of health recommendations, which currently all the health advice is sort of doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But there will come a point when you can move way beyond that and do great advice specifically tailored to individual people's needs. At the same time, personalization can be taken to personalized recommendations in the menu. There's a startup called DishQ, which has currently developed an AI solution where it will deliver a personalized recommendation for you. And it was started by some people who worked at Just Eat, and they felt that there was just too much choice out there, and that the way to deliver a really good experience for the consumer was to give them a few choices that they really wanted. So that could be moving into the restaurant sector. It can also be used to tackle things like food waste, because you could say, I have a piece of salmon and some broccoli in my fridge and this in my pantry, and what can I do? And AI can then be used to develop full personalized recipes that are completely unique.
So are we going to replace Eyal with a robot?
Oh, I don't think so.
Is that what you're saying?
Hopefully not.
No.
What does it make you feel like Eyal?
It's funny because I understand that there is a movement, and I understand the basic needs of that people want to, in very simple words, eat what they know and what they like. But I think that the magic of restaurants is actually going out and eating something that you don't know and experiencing something that you haven't experienced before. And I think that's, that's the real essence of it, especially in restaurants that I like to go to and work at. You are immersing yourself in a new atmosphere. You're going into a journey to different places in the world or to different concepts that some creative people have come up with, and that's a lot of the magic and sort of
But if your restaurant could say, this dish will be perfect for you, you'll never have a disappointing experience at my restaurant by ordering the wrong thing on the menu.
But will it get boring?
Well, we wouldn't be eating the same thing all the time because it's predicting what you would like based on what you do like. The idea is to always enable people to have a good choice that suits them, not necessarily to take away the experience of trying something new, because the machine learning can predict what else you like.
It's like you say. I think it's finding that balance on a menu or inside a specific dish with its component that people can connect because they know and they like it, but also sort of discover something new. And wow, I haven't seen that, And I find it's funny, a lot of the times when we sort of do a twist on a British dish, for instance, I did a fish and chips dish back in the beginning, and it was sort of a za'atar batter for the fish, and the chips were sweet potato, and I did with a bit of tahini, and it was people, it was exactly that. It was what they knew, but from a completely different angle, and it worked really well. Yeah.
So thank you. Jamie, how do you see personalization coming into food, but not like in the future, like not like in 10 years' time? Now, you hear like 2 million people talking constantly. I look at your videos, endless comments. What do you want?
I think Eyal's right. I think you've kind of got this world where the technology can drive those recommendations and that personalization, and you think about how often people starting to use services such as Deliveroo, Uber Eats, even things like HelloFresh and Gusto and those recipe kits. The amount of data that they're building up on their customers based on what they're liking, what they're not liking, what they are ordering and what they're not ordering means that they're going to be able to personalize their recommendations for each customer. But I think you're right, that food's such a personal thing, and I wonder whether if somebody says to you, based on your genetics, based on what your history of what you liked and don't like, this piece of AI says that this dish is your perfect dish. I wonder if that takes some of the heart out of it and takes that whole other side of food, which is the complete personal, the emotional side of it. And food is such an emotive subject, and I just wonder whether if we can get that balance right, I think it could be incredible. And if it can recommend new dishes and flavors and cuisines that you've never tried before, then fantastic. But I think you need that emotive part there as well, because otherwise it just loses all heart.
I think it's okay to have very strong opinion about. It's like with everything. It's like with music. Okay, so you like that specific genre of music, but it's okay to go and listen to something else. It also develops you, and it also makes you appreciate what you're used to in a different way. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Lisa, so how is personalization going to impact our health when it comes to the food we eat?
Yeah, I thought just listening to this conversation right here, what I heard over and over and over again is what consumers like. And that needs to be a part of it. I mean, the heart needs to be a part of it. Your enjoyment needs to be a part of it. But what a lot of the innovation is missing is what consumers need. And for me, that is the really exciting part. And Katy, you alluded to it, the nutrigenetics. Some of the advancements in the technologies that enabled you to have a better understanding of your body, to be able to deliver the nutrients and the value that actually will make you respond in different ways. To me, that's fascinating. You layer that on with the AI that you were talking about to be able to recommend a meal that you're actually going to like. That's game-changing. So for me, I think kind of the technology-enabled ability to merge the food with the health component is really what's going to take consumer health up to the next level where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Well, you're not going to change what people eat if it doesn't taste good, if they don't like it. To make real strides in population health, you have to deliver it in a way that's appealing, or it simply won't stick.
So there's a lot of, what we call gut analytics. So a lot of microbiome analysis to try and understand, when I intake caffeine, it's different than when Katy takes, caffeine, and the impact on our, chances to get a heart attack are different as well. So is there any exciting technology currently that you would consider using as a consumer to check, what is it that you need to eat or not?
Yeah, there are a few companies out there doing it. You can send blood tests off, and they send your results back to you.
Did you try it?
I haven't tried it, no.
Okay.
There's also some debate about how detailed the results are at the moment, because again, a lot of it's segmenting consumers rather than giving it a truly personalized result. So it's in development, I think.
Alon, your former life was at Google, and I remember reading an article probably 5 or 6 years ago about the Google pill. So where's that at? When can we have access to this pill that's going to go in and understand our microbiome so perfectly?
Yeah, I think there are other privacy issues before the pill that Google has to, face, and then maybe the pill will do the comeback. But I keep hearing about health is going to be transformed, and consumers will be able to constantly monitor their guts. But I don't really see it happening yet. And there's a lot of, just like Elisa, you just mentioned, you said it's not about what you want, it's also about what you need. And even when we all know that eating crisps and French fries is unhealthy for us, we still go and we go to the shelf and we pick the unhealthy food. So are we going to force people also to to do their daily microbiome analysis?
So I'll throw some stats at you, which I think are interesting. The World Economic Forum did a report on the economic burden of non-communicable diseases, of which diet is a huge contributing factor. These are things like heart disease. We did it in about 2012, and the number that they came up to over 2 decades was $47 trillion. Now, we just did a report called Innovation with a Purpose, looking at some of the game-changing technologies in the food space. And when we did the research on that, one of the things that we looked at was the investment in startups around the food system space. And when we compared the investment in food systems or food-related technologies all the way from production to the consumer end, and what the startups, the investments were in those startups versus health care, and this is the back end of those non-communicable diseases after you have them, there was a tenfold difference. I think it was $45 billion into the food startups and $145 billion into the healthcare startups. And those numbers just don't make sense fundamentally. So I think kind of things like where the investment money is placed, things like what are the partnerships that you're teeing up. We're talking about innovation here. How you think about innovation and cutting through from all different lenses, from the production side to the consumption side to the behavior change side. Looking at all those dynamics becomes even more important now. And when you layer on the new technologies and the costs of technologies, you look at gene editing, for instance, and how far down that cost has come in the last 5 years. It's tremendous change. So I think we're on the cusp of seeing a lot of those technologies actually start to have breakthroughs.
Yes, so the food industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. It's massive. And all these, new advances, but also from the consumer perspective, the consumer demands different kind of food, more responsible, more sustainable, healthier, more innovative, right? So the trillion-dollar business now is shaking, right? The big corporations are kind of losing the game for the smaller, more inventive product. Food tech companies like lab-grown meat is on the rise. what is your message? Because we only got a couple minutes left. What is your message to the entrepreneurs, potential entrepreneurs, and corporations that might be in the audience? If you had to pick your bets on one thing in the food industry, what would it be? Jamie.
So I would say to entrepreneurs, startups, that kind of thing, I don't think there's been a better time than now to trial new ideas. There are more ways than ever before, whether it's new food products that can get out through street markets and street food festivals, using social media, Kickstarter. There are so many more ways now to get an idea off the ground and test it before having to go out and get investment or form it into something real. You can test, and whether it's new flavor combinations, whether it's new dishes, combining cuisines, that kind of thing, it can happen on such a small basis now before having to take big leaps into investment or opening restaurants and that kind of thing. So I think give it a go, and we see so many people doing that now and chatting to us about what they're trying to do, and it's incredible and it's so exciting to see it happening, and I think London's one of the places where it's happening more than ever.
A lot of it is happening in the UK as well, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Lisa.
Yeah, I would say partnerships. To me, it's this kind of thinking that you need to innovate by yourself and do it in a closed room, and really opening up your scope of who you want to work with and what the possibilities could be, and thinking about that across traditional sector lines and across different lines of society, be it with civil society and big business, or a small startup in the healthcare space and a big food company. I think now is really the time to do that.
I think, obviously, as you both mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities to really innovate and figure out interesting ways that weren't possible before to get food to people and to get more interesting and better food to people. I think it'll be really interesting to look at it from a cultural and sort of social perspective, because food, it's almost as nutritious for the body. It's a social thing. It's family, it's feelings, it's all of these things in our lives that revolve around that thing that we're consuming. I haven't figured it out, but I think if someone would think about that aspect of it, it can be really interesting. I think it's a lot of that in food.
So connecting the emotions to the social aspect of food.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, food touches us all, and I think it's probably one of the industries with the biggest opportunity to make a difference with some of the most fundamental challenges we face around sustainability, around food security, around nutrition and health, food as medicine. I think small consumer-facing brands and startups are taking market share from the big established brands, but that's not truly disruptive innovation. Truly disruptive innovation will happen around these big picture questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I hope we're going to have a tastier, healthier, and more sustainable future together. And thank you for the panel for making it from different parts of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.